They found the cave in the guidebooks under polite names. The Corythi Sea Cave if you asked a boatman, the Spiliani if you asked a shepherd, but on the island the old men just called it the mouth, as if the limestone itself wanted to say something and had been stuck for 1,000 years on its first consonant. The cave opened at waterline on the northern coast of Zakynthos. The cliffs here a parchment of pale strata written by time and salt. On summer days the Meltemi wind combed the pines thin and made a cat's fur of the sea. On winter nights waves climbed the ledges as if rehearsing for a siege. Across the dry months, tourists drifted in on rented quads and deck shoes to stare from the cliff top, take photographs, and throw voices to hear them thrown back twice. The archaeologists came because of a rumor that prehistory had been careless here. Flints found in goat dirt, a sherd of pottery with a thumbnail groove, a fisherman who swore he'd netted a bone that did not belong to any fish. The Ephorate of Paleoanthropology, Speleology wrote a modest permit. Preliminary survey, non-invasive methods, team of 6. They brought a drone and photogrammetry rigs and tape, because tape persists when batteries sulk. They came with 2 islanders hired as fixers, a paramedic with shoulders like a door, and a woman named Calliope, who had the map of every cave in the Ionian folded into the left half of her brain. The island had another story pinned to this cave, less tidy than archaeology. A tourist had gone missing here years before. His name was Daniel Hart, 48 when he vanished, British, a winter swimmer, a man who packed his tea into a dented mug and added time to it because he believed salt and time could rewire an aging heart. He wore a woven bracelet of black cord with a knot he refused to cut. He carried a dog-eared paperback on island flora and scribbled in its margins. He kept a photograph in his wallet of himself and Marta on a beach in Portugal, laughing, a gull mid-heckle above them. He flew into Zakynthos when summer thinned to September and days still baked you if you let them. He told the pension owner he was here for the light and caves. They found his backpack near the cave entrance 4 years ago, late in the day when the limestone is more sky than rock. Inside, the mug, still damp with a ring dark as a fault line. The paperback, a pencil tucked at thymus capitatus, scent honeyed, hills above Kerry. A cotton shirt folded, as if hoping to be mistaken for order. A camera with 3 images from inside the cave. The last a blur that could be wave or wall. The Hellenic Coast Guard came with ARIB. The Fire Service EMAK came with ropes and helmets. Speleologists came with meters and respect. They worked the light to tatters, then worked in darkness with lamps and lines. And the cave worked back with 1,000 small tricks. Sudden pools where there had been stone, stone where there had been air, the sea speaking new syllables every minute. They did not find him. A year later they searched again with a winter window. Calmer seas, colder water, clearer conscience. Divers with names like Nikos and Gerasimos ran tethers into the mouth and out again. They touched smooth limestone that felt like polished bone, found goat droppings where goats had never signed, recovered a single button corroded to the color of olives, and a strip of canvas that had no history besides the one it had just acquired. The official report learned to say undetermined with dignity. Daniela's name joined a list in a filing cabinet where names went to rust quietly. For summers past, Calliope got the permit. The island's memory, which is longer than cities understand, still carried Daniel Hart on its tongue, the Englishman who spoke to the cave and did not come back. The archaeologists came to measure Paleolithic time and found themselves counted by modern ghosts. On the first day the team moved as if in a kitchen that had just been rearranged, careful until the new edges learned their hands. Dr. Manolis walked the rim with a stick, knocking rhythm into ledges. Ares, the paramedic, staged the kits. Oxygen, trauma, blankets. Out of the sun, Calliope set reflective targets along the cavity's first chamber. 6 white coins on gray stone. Elena, the youngest of them, checked batteries with the anxiety of youth that has not yet learned anything always dies on a schedule. A goat watched from a thorn bush with an eye that believed nothing and therefore could be surprised by nothing. They made notes because notes are nets. Entrance 3.1 m wide, 2.2 m high at low tide. Chamber A, pebble beach 8 m deep, ceiling scalloped by phreatic flow. Chamber B, narrows to slot on right wall, sharp-edged, breathing cold air. The slot became a character by noon, casting a shadow that did not obey the light. Wave sets entered like timid guests and left like thieves. Salt turned lips into statements. The drone threaded its propellers through the first chamber and sulked at the second. GPS was a rumor in stone. In a casual world, Daniel Hart would enter here like a footnote. The archaeologists were not casual. They ran a thin orange cord from light to dark, the way divers tie Ariadne into reality when they must go where maps cannot. On the second day, they found a cairn of rounded pebbles placed in a small, deliberate pyramid near the slot. It felt recent. It felt like prayer. Calliope knelt, let her fingers memorize the weight of the top stone, and then returned it exactly where found. Elena photographed it with a scale card. Evidence of human visit. Modern. Do not disturb, Dr. Manolis wrote on his slate. At noon, wind arrived. The sea changed personality without consultation. With it came the Coast Guard officer on his quad, Lieutenant Stavros, who had put his signature under the permit with the restraint of a man who had seen more sea than paper. He glanced into the mouth, watched the harnesses tumble, watched Ares coil rope, and said the island's two-word blessing, Siga, Siga. Slowly, slowly. He had been in the first search after Daniel vanished. He did not give the details unasked. He did not believe details belonged to cameras. In the evenings they returned to volumes, to rooms that held the smell of stone and soap. They ate fava puree and octopus grilled until it admitted to being food. Elena wrote a line to her mother because mothers tack your voice to a wall when the rest of you travels. Calliope spread maps under a cheap fan. Dr. Manolis paced the balcony talking in the private grammar of men who owe money to universities for dreams. They slept the sleep of people who have spent their day taking dictation from rock. On the third day the slot earned a caution tape. The laser scanner returned a mesh that looked like a corrugated throat, with a sharp corner at 1.30 m where something like a squeeze demanded bodies remake themselves. Ares tested it. He was the wrong shape for squeezes and said so. Elena, lighter, crawled in with 2 lights and a promise to reverse if the cave reversed her. She counted centimeters out loud, not for others, but because numbers are better than adjectives when things narrow. At 80 centimeters, right knee twisted, left shoulder scraping. She saw marks on the limestone at ear level, thin incisions that could have been geology if geology had ever needed a straight edge. She backed out to fetch calipers. When she returned, the marks were still marks, parallel pairs about 2 millimeters apart, 11 centimeters long. Metal object dragged, she wrote, and did not write what her ribs felt like they were remembering. That evening, because Calliope believed in bodies as instruments, they swam at a cove where the sea was a sentence that ended in a period instead of a question mark. Elena told the water the story of Daniel Hart, as if the sea required rumor to make sense. His bracelet, his mug, the book, the photograph. She said he wanted the light in caves, and the sea said you and everyone, and then the sea said nothing, which is its truer language. On the 4th morning the light came up honest, and the wind did not pick a fight. They rigged the slot. A line to the scanner, another to a hull point, another for humility. Ares made a face at the harness that would chew Elena's ribs, and Elena made a face at Ares for making faces. Calliope tapped the limestone once with her knuckles, a greeting, a warning, either way a syllable, and nodded. Elena slid in, this time with a micro camera on her helmet and a contact mic on the rock to capture what the limestone would confess by vibration. Meters are faith dressed as numbers. The first meter said you fit. The second said you might. The third said did you check your last will in a voice softer than chalk. Elena exhaled until her sternum petitioned and then turned left into the corrugation. The camera saw only the future, which is to say rock. Air. Ares asked from the mouth, where mouth meant cave, and cave meant the whole question of geology. Cool, Elena said, and felt the lie salt itself into the truth. At 1.30 m the squeeze pressed its opinion against her shoulder. She turned her head to find where space became geometry, and in that glance saw something that was not rock, and not water, and not shadow. She closed her eyes because it is not polite to blink at bones. She called out that she needed a mirror. Not the kind you keep in a bathroom, but the kind that lets you trick light into visiting corners. Calliope sent one on the line. Elena angled it with 2 fingers and let the headlamp paint a small, rectangular day into the angle. What returned was a color that limestone never learned. Brown with the grammar of old ivory, the oiled sheen of bone that has met time and paperwork. What do you see? Ares said, the way men say to other people who are telling the truth in places where truth cannot stand upright. Something, Elena said, the wrong size of word. And then the right one, arm. Silence is a safety practice in caves. For a moment they listened to silence practice back. Then a chorus. Ares on the line's tension. Calliope asking for angle, for distance, for any geometry she could feed to rope. Dr. Manolis already living in the future where radios would have to decide whether to be procedural or human. They did not touch it at first. Calliope told Elena to place the mirror again, to photograph, to put the scale card into the frame, to breathe in pieces. The camera blinked in patient appetite. What the images showed when they arrived at the tablet, the delayed present the field accepts as miracle, was a forearm, hand absent, bones together, wedged in a fissure where 2 limestone planes had learned hatred late in life. At the wrist, something dark clung that did not belong to stone. Cord braided. A bracelet. No one said Daniel because names are lit matches near gas. Ares made a sound that was almost a blessing and almost the last half of a curse. The protocol awoke in them the way training wakes in muscles. Flag the site. Inform the Coast Guard. Inform the police, do not disturb. But caves are pedants. They teach that not touching is sometimes the only way to touch. They pulled Elena back on a slow tide of line and cursing, and the light behind her abandoned arm returned to being dark. By the time Lieutenant Stavros arrived, his quad coughing red dust into the noon, they had the cave mouth dressed with tape and the first chamber renamed scene. He listened to the facts with the irritation of a man whose body already knew them. For years, he said, and did not have to finish the sentence that would have to move through Lena's voice to be properly spoken. We found him, and we did not. He read the permit again, because paper likes to be reminded it is not alone. He called EKAB to place a standby ambulance by the gravel. He called the prosecutor to say the word remains to a man who hears it too often and not often enough. He called Father Dionysios without logging the call, because he had learned that if you ask a priest to stand at the lip of a mystery, the island's weather improves. They conferred on the how. The fissure held. The rock's angles looked like lawyers. They could not widen it without turning the cave into a quarry and the past into a hazard. They could not reach the arm without making a body a set of parts. Calliope traced the fissure with a laser, measuring millimeters like an apology. She suggested a microsaw, a scalpel for stone, diamond wire, water feed, patience counted in hours. Stavros said slowly the way he had said it at the permit. They sent Ares in with Elena again, this time with a rig that could cradle what had been named, and then nested into a world that would immediately begin its next argument. Bag. Tag. Chain of custody. Ares did not like the cave. The cave tolerated Ares. At the squeeze, he exhaled the life out of his ribs and became geometry. Elena angled the mirror and fed him numbers. He slid the rig in, tunelessly humming Mickey's Theater Rockies because the body believes melody is armor. The bracelet glinted not with gold, but with oil, the cave's watermark. When the wire touched the rock, the cave remembered an older sound, and the contact mic on the wall sent to their headphones the hiss of limestone accepting insult. Ares worked as if time had been braided into the line. Elena kept the mirror where it would keep telling the truth even if they hoped for a different tense. Calliope watched the feed, the way a midwife watches a graph of contractions that is only an approximation of a life being argued. In the final minute, the fissure gave not with drama, but with the whisper of an envelope opening. Ares cupped the forearm in both hands the way he had once caught his daughter when she jumped from the kitchen table, trusting that fathers are physics. He slid it into the cradle, then into the bag, then into a world where zip ties make dignity. They pulled out, breathless and stupid with air. Calliope set the bag on the stainless tray beside the scanner and placed the scale card, 10 centimeters, black and white, at its edge. The camera made of the moment a document. Lieutenant Stavros wrote the name Hart, D, on a line that did not require proof, and then wrote possible because the law insists on perhaps until the lab says is. Above them, goats announced nothing to nobody. The sea put on a face like glass. The island took the news into its pockets where news keeps warm. By dusk, the first chamber felt smaller than math. Father Dionysios came and made the sign that is either a sketch of suffering or a map of how to bear it. Calliope took off her helmet, as if churches require hair to be free. Elena sat on a stone and realized she had been thirsty for 6 hours and drank all the water in her bottle and still felt rescued by air. They closed the cave with a tape that means nothing to rock. The quad bore Stavros and the bag back up to the gravel. Ares carried the coil of wire like an exhausted serpent. Dr. Manilus walked behind, counting expenses into a phone that would make them later into scandal or a footnote. Elena turned back once. The mouth looked like it had told a joke it didn't expect you to understand. The lab and Patras took custody because proximity had finally earned them trust. Forensic anthropologist Dr. Athina Papadaki received the bag with the expression of someone who knows the weight of history measured in grams. She documented what they all already knew. Distal radius and ulna intact. No evidence of paramotum trauma on cortical surface, periosteum largely absent, manganese staining consistent with long immersion, fibrous cord at wrist, woven bracelet, adherent by friction and mineral accretion. DNA extraction from marrow was optimistic. For years Insult had done its arithmetic, but the island kept a toothbrush and a comb from the pension, sealed by Lieutenant Stavros after the first search. Matches take days to learn good manners. The report would take weeks to become a sentence anyone could read without rehearsing. In volumes, the cafe by the road posted a paper sign. Cave closed, police. The fishermen speculated with the authority of men who have pulled time hand over hand. The goat herder Giannis said the cave had nereids, water nymphs who collect bracelets, and was not entirely joking. A British couple left a flower at the lookout because the island's English story had knocked politely and been let back in. Marta, in London, was reached by Stavros, who had learned that voices must cross water slowly. He said he could not say yes, but he could say we found something that wears his name. She said, thank you the way you say it when the world has been too large for too long. The F8 recorded their own version for their minutes. During scheduled non-invasive survey operations in the Karithi Cave complex, Chamber B presented modern remains. Work halted. Authorities informed. Presence of archaeologists coincidental. No prehistoric materials disturbed. Bureaucracies narrate to preserve themselves. The team accepted the distance. You do not come to rock to receive applause. In the village above Alikes, Panagiota the innkeeper held up a tabloid with the cruelty of a good headline. Arm in the mouth. The paper invented wolves of the sea, invented criminals who used caves, invented scuba assassins, and storm gods. The serious paper decided it was accident and filed it beside other accidents the island had learned to pronounce correctly. Stavros read none of them. He returned to the cave the next morning to stand where paper cannot stand and listen to his own breathing lengthen to match the day. Calliope and Elena returned as well, not to work, but to account, to write the report that would decide the next cave, the next permit, the next quarrel with accountants. They measured the fissure again without the arm, 35 millimeters at the narrowest, meaning a living person had not placed that bone there on purpose. Calliope wrote the word jammed in Greek because the English sounded like an apology. They searched the first chamber for anything else, a button, a turn of thread, a coin that tourists leave in places that do not return coins. They found a pebble cairn again and left it again. Elena put her ear against the limestone and said, "You hear the sea more honestly this way." And Calliope said, "You always have." And Elena blushed at having wanted to be original in a room older than salt. By the week's end, Dr. Papadaki had a polite match. mtDNA consistent with Daniel Hart. Autosomal markers partial but supportive. Probability of identity sufficient for legal closure. The report threaded its way through Patris Zakynthos Athens like a receipt passed down a table. The prosecutor signed the word release. Stavros called Marta again and said yes. She flew in with a small suitcase and a courage that made islanders look at their shoes. They held the funeral at Agios Nikolaos because the church there gets the wind right. The coffin was short because truth sometimes is. On it lay Daniel's mug, cleaned but still lined, and his paperback, with time pressed between pages 42 and 43 as if he had foreseen, needing a herbarium for grief. Marta placed the photograph in a frame on top, the two of them on a beach, a gull rude in the background, their mouths open to laughter you could hear if you let the picture teach you. Father Dionysios did not sermonize. He told the island's version. A man talked to a cave, and after a long while the cave spoke back one word. He made the sign of a cross that knew boats. Calliope cried without spectacle. Elena put her helmet on the stone outside, like an offering practical enough to be accepted. The file in Athens closed with the sentence that museums hate and islands accept. Cause of death, undetermined. Journalists try to keep the story open, and were right to try. Some rooms should never be cleaned of dust. They asked Stavros what he believed. He said the sea is not a highway. They asked Calliope if caves have appetites. She said caves have gravity and geometry, which looks like appetite if you own a body. They asked Marta if she was angry. She said no, and the no sounded like a rope thrown to a person who can no longer catch it. In the months that followed, versions assembled themselves as they always do. Natural, he entered at low tide. Misjudged, a swell lifted him, his shoulder wedged into the fissure, water changed him from verb to noun. The bracelet held where skin could not. The sea brought him to bone and left him there, because rock is the one partner it cannot move quickly. Criminal, someone pushed him. But the cave carries no witness marks of anyone besides Daniel and goats. The forearm tells no story of struggle, no cut, no fracture. The island shrugged the version off like a coat unfit for weather. Mythic, narrates took him for the way he praised light underwater. A neat story for evenings when power goes and candles upgrade superstition. The island let the story live because islands are museums for stories that cities evict. Willed, he chose to vanish. He had a life that could have held this choice, but also the mug was ready for tea, the book marked in the middle of a paragraph. The photograph carried in his wallet long after men stopped carrying photographs. People who leave on purpose leave differently. The F8 published a short paper about wave-cut niches and phreatic morphology at Corythi, with a final paragraph written so clean the truth could find itself in it. The discovery of modern human remains in a wedge of superimposed limestone plains demonstrates the risk to untrained visitors during low-tide entry. The fissure's geometry allows entrapment at shoulder height during modest surge. We recommend signage and restricted access during survey. Between the lines, do not come here and ask the mouth to love you. Marta stayed on the island 3 days. She took the quad to the lookout once, because the human heart is a tide that must see the shape of shoreline that broke it. Stavros offered to drive. She said she needed to hear the engine make sense beneath her. At the edge, she placed the mug on the limestone ledge and filled it with tea that had seen time. She spoke no words because some languages require water to interpret. She left the mug there until the wind asked for it, and then she took it with her because theft is a lesser sin than litter. Elena returned to Athens and dreamt in limestone for weeks. She bought a second-hand contact mic and listened to the legs of her table, the door of her apartment, the railing of the balcony. Everything had a story about force, none about mercy. She wrote to her mother that she had seen a hand that could not wave, and her mother wrote back that she should drink mountain tea with honey and remember that hands hold even when they cannot move. Calliope revised her map. She added the fissure with a symbol she had only used twice before, for places that behave like trapdoors. She sent an email to a list of speleologists that said please do not, and was read by half and obeyed by a quarter. She held the scanner's point cloud on her laptop and rotated the mouth until it looked like a flower that had decided petals were for other species. In volumes, the cafe replaced the sign with one that said caution. Swell because islands never forget that warning should be a noun. Panagiota told a new batch of tourists the version where the bracelet saved a name from becoming geology. The tourists nodded and bought lookamads and walked to the edge and came back careful. The goats continued their editorial policy, which is to ignore questions. The following spring, the F8 returned with a smaller team to finish the scan Calliope had promised the rock. They brought a priest along because paperwork had learned its manners. At low tide, they entered Chamber B and found the fissure clean, impersonal, like a mouth after the dentist. They placed a tiny plaque not in the rock, no drilling, but on a removable stand where the pebble beach begins, for Daniel Hart, who loved the light in caves. 1968 to 2016. They packed it away after the photographs because caves are not museums and also because tourists steal. On the last evening, they sat on the balcony at Volumes and ate tomatoes that knew what salt is for. The Meltemi spoke in a register that makes conversation honest. Ares lifted his glass to Calliope, who lifted hers to Elena, who lifted hers to Stavros, who lifted his to Marta somewhere over water. They did not say closure because that word belongs to files. They said Kalinicta, good night, and it sounded like keep going. And if you stand at the edge of the Coryphe mouth when the sea is a gentleman and the wind a clerk, you can lay your palm against the limestone and feel the slow tick of a world that does not owe you clarity. The ledge where the mug once rested is just ledge again. The place the forearm was is just angle. You can watch a drone stitch photographs into a mesh that will go to a server on land and sleep there like a patient animal. You can say his name, Daniel, and the cave will not answer in words, which is an answer. And if a wave runs up to your boot and licks salt into your laces, you will have been reminded that the island keeps what it must and returns what it can, which is the best bargain rock will ever sign. The story ends with a symbol because the island demanded one. A bracelet that held fast where skin could not, a mug that kept a ring of tea on limestone that resisted stain, a paperback with time unpressed between pages, a photograph that shows two people laughing in a time that believed laughter was permanent, and a hand that could not come free. The cave taught them a grammar. Mystery first, document second. The sea added its clause. Timing is fate. The island wrote the period with a goat hoofprint in dust. And you, reading the filed reports and the edited headlines and the archaeological notes that pretend the past is a straight corridor, now carry the last piece. The way light in that cave makes even absence look like a presence that will answer if you learn its words. You won't. No one does. But some afternoons a slot of limestone will turn a headlamp into a small square of day and show you how close living and stuck can be, the one breathing cold air over the shoulder of the other. That square of day, the arm, the bracelet, the mouth. This is the whole riddle, which remains unsolved by design. The archaeologists packed their tapes. The island folded the story into itself. The sea practiced its patience against stone. And somewhere a woman carries a mug from kitchen to table and back again because motion is the only memorial that never empties.